Today we're here to talk about the plankton in the Indian River Lagoon. Plankton are grouped into two main types, our zooplankton, which are animal-like plankton, and our phytoplankton, or plant-like plankton, like this guy. These are diatoms, and they come in various shapes, like the triangle shape you see here, star shapes, circles, and even pen shapes. Now they get their energy from the sun, and they store that within their bodies. So they're eaten by a lot of other animals and are an important food source out in the Indian River Lagoon. What I'm holding here are two other types of plankton we find in the Indian River Lagoon, the Pico Cyanobacteria and a pedinophyte. And they were the ones that were most responsible for the 2011 super bloom we had. That small size allows them to reproduce very quickly, and in fact the Pico Cyanobacteria at times can make up to 98% of the plankton that is found out there. Their small size is also great for a food source for many of our smaller zooplankton. So they are important to have out in the lagoon. We just don't want to see them in huge numbers like we did in the 2011 super bloom. This particular plankton is Pyridinium. And you may have heard of blooms in Tampa Bay that produce some toxins that, when the shellfish ingest them, make them harmful for people to eat. Luckily for us, the blooms here in the Indian River Lagoon don't produce those same amount of toxins. In fact, Pyridinium is important to our economy here in the lagoon. The Pyridinium has a unique ability of creating bioluminescence, which means it glows when it's disturbed. So this has been utilized by a lot of the ecotourism groups who offer bioluminescent kayak paddles during the summer months. So what I'm holding here is Pseudonitzschia. Pseudonitzschia is one that we luckily haven't had any large blooms of in the Indian River Lagoon. But blooms on the west coast of the United States in California have caused issues. It does create a toxin that can be harmful to fish and also cause issues with birds that consume those fish. In fact, a town in California had seabirds crashing down into their town after they become disoriented from the toxins in this algae. They believe that that was actually the inspiration for Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds. The Pseudonitzschia also is very thin and sharp, so it can get lodged into fish gills and cause irritation and damage in those fish gills. What I'm holding here is Oriya Umbra, and Oriya Umbra is the plankton that is responsible for the current brown tide bloom we have in the Indian River Lagoon. You may have heard the term harmful algal bloom before, and that can refer to two different types of algal blooms. One is just one that is so numerous that it blocks out sunlight and causes issues with seagrass on the bottom of the lagoon. And then others are harmful algal blooms because of the toxic nature of some of the plankton. Luckily for us, Oriya Umbra is not toxic. However, it does like very salty conditions. And they think that is what partially contributed to one of the longest brown tide blooms in history that happened off the coast of Texas. What I'm holding here is a plankton known as Fibrocapsa. Fibrocapsa is found in pretty much every saltwater body throughout the world. And it was thought to have been transported around the world in the ballast water of cargo ships. Fibrocapsa was identified in the recent red tide bloom. Now, while it wasn't the most numerous organism in that bloom, it did bring a little concern because it can produce toxins. Now, these toxins aren't harmful to people, but can be harmful to our fish. Luckily, there weren't a lot of them in that bloom, so we didn't have that much of a concern. What I'm holding here is Oxyrus. This is the organism that was identified as the major component of the recent red tide bloom. Now, we're excited to see this one instead of some other red tides that can be harmful, because this one doesn't produce any toxins. In fact, it actually likes to eat Oriya Umbra, our brown tide that's out there, which is why we believe we're seeing these blooms popping up. And it's described to hunt its prey like a raptor. It circles around before pouncing on top of its prey. So those are just some of the types of plankton we see out in the Indian River Lagoon. Some of them are beneficial, Some of them can be harmful in large numbers. The algal blooms that we see are often attributed to excess nutrients in the Indian River Lagoon. We need to do our part to reduce the nutrients we put into the lagoon to decrease some of these larger harmful algal blooms.